how the economy machine works in story minute. The economy works like a simple machine, but many people don't understand it or they don't agree on how it works, and this has led to a lot of needless economic suffering. Deep sense of responsibility to share my simple practical economic template. Though it's unconventional, it has helped me to sidestep for global financial crisis, and it has worked well for me for over 30 years. Let's begin. Though the economy might seem complex, it works in a simple mechanical way. It's made up of a few simple parts and a lot of simple transactions that are repeated over and over a gazillion times. These transactions are above all else driven by human nature, and they create three main forces that drive the economy. Number one, productivity growth. Number two, the short-term debit cycle. Number three, the long-term debit cycle. Well, look at these forces and how laying them on top of each other creates a good template for tracking economic movements and figuring out what's happening now. Let's start with the simplest part of the economy, transactions. An economy is simply the sum of the transactions that make it up. And a transaction is a very simple thing. You make transactions all the time. Every time you buy something, you create a transaction. Each transaction consists of a buyer exchange money or credit with a seller for goods, services, or financial asset. Credit spent just like money, so adding together the money spent and the amount of credit spent, you could know the total spending. The total amount spent drives the economy. If you drive the amount spent by the quantity sold, you get the price. And that's it. That's transaction. It's the building block of the economy machine. All successes and forces in an economy are driven by transaction. So if you then transactions, we can understand with the whole economy. A market consists of all the buyers and all the sellers making transactions for the same thing. For example, there is a wheat market, a car market, a stock market, and markets for millions of things. An economy consists of all these transactions in all its market. If we add up the total spending and the total quantity sold in all the markets, that overall you need to know to understand economy. It's just that simple. People, businesses, banks, and governments all engage in transactions the way I just described. Exchange money and credit for goods, services, and financial assets. The biggest buyer and sellers is the government, which consists of the two important parts. A central government that collects taxes and spends money, and a central bank which is different from the other buyers and sellers because it controls the amount of money and credit in the economy. It does this by influencing interest rate and printing new money. For this reason, as wealthy, the central bank is an important player in the flow of credit. I want you to pay attention to credit. Credit is the most important part of the economy and probably the least understood. It's the most important part because it's the biggest and most volatile part. Just like buyers and sellers go to the market to make a transaction, so do lenders or borrowers. Lenders usually want to make their money into more money, and borrowers usually want to buy something they can't afford, like a house or a car, and they want to invest in something like starting a business. Credit and help both lenders and borrowers get the way one. The borrowers promise to repay the amount they borrow, called principal, plus an additional amount called interest. When interest rates are high, there is less borrowing because it's basic. When interest rates are low, borrowing increases because it's cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and lenders believe them, credit create. And the people can agree to create credit out of thin air. That seems simple enough, but credit is tricky because it has different names. As soon as credit is created, it immediately turns into debit. Debt is both an asset to the lender and a liability to the borrower. In the future, when the borrower repays the loan plus interest, the asset and the liability disappear, and the transaction is settled. So why is credit so important? Because when a borrower receives credit, he is able to increase the spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you spend, someone else earns. And every dollar you earn, someone else has spent. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone's income rises, it makes lenders more willing to lend him money because now he's more worthy of credit. A credit-worthy borrower has two things: the ability to repay the collateral. Having a lot of income in relation to his debt gives him the ability to repay. In the event that he can't repay, he has a valuable asset to use as collateral that can be sold. This makes lenders feel comfortable lending him money, so increases income increases the borrowing, which also increases the spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, this leads to more increases the borrowing and so on. But this self-reinforcing pattern leads to economic growth and is a wise cycle. In a transaction, you have to give something in order to get something, and how much you get depends on how much you produce. Over time, we learn and the accumulated knowledge raises our living standards. We call this productivity growth. Who are inventive and hardworking raises their productivity and their living standards faster than those who are compliant and lazy. But that is necessary to the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a big driver of economic swing. That is because it's allowed us to consume more than we require it, and it forces us to consume less than we produce, so when we have to pay back. Debt swings occur in two big cycles. One takes about 5 to 8 years and the other takes about 75 to 100 years. While most people feel the swings, they typically don't see them cycle because they seem them to up close day by day, week by week. In this lecture, we are going to step back and look at these three big processes and how they interact to make up our experience. As mentioned, those swings are allowed in the line of that how much innovation or hard work there is. That is primarily due to how much credit there is. Let's for a second imagine an economy without credit. In this economy, the only way I increase my spending is to increase my income, which requires me to be more productive and do more work. Increases productivity is the only way for growth. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time I own a small product. A small section and play this out, we see a progression like a productivity growth line. But because we grow, we have cycles. This is due to the rules and regulation. It's due to human nature and the way the credit works. Think of borrowing as simply a way of following spending forward. In order to buy something you can't afford, you need to spend more than you pay. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. And doing so your current time in the future, then you need to spend less than you make in order to pay it back. It very quickly simplifies a cycle. Basically, anytime you borrow, you create a cycle. This is true as for the individual as it is for the economy. This is why understanding credit is so important because it's set into motion, the mechanically predictable stories of events of the happen in the future. This makes it different from money. Money is what you settle transactions with. When you buy a beer from bartender with cash, the transaction is settled immediately. But when you buy a beer with credit, it's like stand bartender. You're saying you promise to pay in the future. Together, you and the bartender credit create the asset. For example, if borrow money to buy a big TV, if it doesn't generate income for you to pay back to debt, but if you borrow money to buy a tractor, and that tractor lets you harvest more crop and run more money, and you can pay back your debt and improve your living standards. And an economy with credit with the following the transaction and see how credit can grow. Let me give you an example. Suppose you earn $100,000 on your year debt. You are credit worthy enough to borrow $10,000. Say you own a credit card, so you can spend 110,000. Since your spending is another person's income, someone is earning $110,000. The person earning $110,000 with no debt can borrow $11,000. So he can spend $102,000. Even though he has only earned $110,000, his spending is another person's income. And by following the transaction, we can begin to see how this process works in a self-reinforcing pattern. But remember, borrowing creates cycle, and if the cycle goes up, it eventually needs to come down. This is a cycle. And if the cycle goes up, it eventually needs to come down. This leads us into the short-term debt cycle. As economic activity increases, risk and expansion. The first phase of the short-term debt cycle, spending continues to increase and prices start to rise. This happens because the increases in spending is fueled by credit, which can be credit installed out of thin air. When the amount of spending and incomes grow faster than the production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes problems. Since prices rise, it rises interest rates. With higher interest rates, fewer people can afford to borrow money, and the cost of exceed debit rise. Think about this as the monthly payments on your credit card going up. Because people borrow less and have higher debt repayments, they have less money left over to spend. So spending slows. And since one person's spending is another person's incomes drop. And so on and so forth. When people spend less, prices go down. We call this inflation. Economic activity decreases and we have a recession. If the recession becomes too severe and inflation is no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rate to cause everything to pick up again. With low interest rates, debt repayments and reduce and borrowing and spending pick up. And it's another expansion. As you can see, the economy works like a machine. In the short-term debt cycle, spending is consumed only by the willingness of lenders and borrowers to provide and receive credit. When credit is easily available, there is an economic expansion. When credit is easily available, there is a recession. And note that this cycle is controlled primarily by the central bank. The short-term debt cycle typically is 5 to 8 years and happens over and over again for decades. But notice that the bottom and the top of each cycle finish with more growth in the previous cycle and with more down. Why? Because people feel they have an inclination to borrow and spend more instead of paying back debt. It's human nature. Because of this, over long periods of time, debt rises faster than incomes. Credit the long-term debt cycle. Despite people becoming more in-depth, even more people extend credit. Why? Because everything these are going great. Despite people becoming more in-debit, lenders even more fully extend credit. Why? Because everyone thinks things are going great. People are just focused on what's been happening lately. What's been happening lately? Incomes have been rising. Asset value are going up. The stock market lures. It's a boom. It pays to buy goods, services, and financial assets. We borrow money. When people do rather power, that we carry it forward. So when even the debts haven't been growing, incomes have been growing nearly as fast as them. Let's call the ratio of debt to income the debt burden. So long as incomes continue to rise, the debt burden stays manageable. At the same time, asset value is soared. People borrow huge amounts of money to buy assets as investment, causing their prices to rise even higher. People bear wealthy, so even with the accumulation of lots of debt, rising incomes and asset value help borrowers remain credit worthy for a long time. But this obviously cannot continue forever, and it doesn't. At the same time, asset value is lower. People borrow huge amounts of money to buy assets as investment, causing their prices to rise even higher. People feel wealthy. So even with the accumulation of lots of debt, rising incomes and asset value help borrowers remain credit worthy for a long time. But this obviously cannot continue forever, and it doesn't. Over decades, debt burden slowly increases, creating lower and larger debt repayments. At some point, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes, forcing people to cut back on their spending. And since unprocessed spending is another processed income, incomes begin to go down, which makes people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. Debt repayments continue to rise, which makes spending drop even further. And the cycle reverses itself. This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burdens have simply because too big. For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world, this happened in 2008. It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan in 1998 and in the United States back in 1929. Now the economy begins deleveraging. In the deleveraging, people got spending, incomes fall, credit is fear. As the prices drop, banks get squeezed, the stock market crashes. Social tensions rise and the whole thing started to feed on itself the other way. And as incomes fall and debt repayments rise, borrowers get squeezed. No longer credit worthy, credit drives up. And borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to make their debt repayments. Scramble to fill this wall, borrowers are forced to sell assets. The rest to sell assets for the market at the same time as spending fails. This is when the stock market collapses. The real estate market tanks and banks get into trouble. As asset prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People feel full, credit rapidly disappears. Then less spending, less income, less worthy, less credit, less borrowing, and so on and so on. It's a vicious cycle. This appears similar to a recession, but the difference here is that interest rate can be lowered to save the bank. In a recession, lowering interest rates works to stimulate borrowing. However, the leverage lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rates are already low and soon hit 0%. So the stimulation ends. Interest rates in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging of the 1930s and again in 2008. The difference between a recession and a deleveraging is that in a deleveraging borrowers, the burden have simply gotten too big and can't be They lived by the difference between a recession and deleveraging is that in deleveraging, borrowers that burdens have simply gotten too big and can be relieved by the lowering interest rates. Lenders realize that debt have become too large to ever to fully pay back. Borrowers have lost their ability to repay and their collateral has lost value. They feel crippled by the debt they don't even want more. Lenders stop rendering, borrowers stop borrowing. Think of the economy as being not incredibly just like an individual. So what do you do about the leveraging? The problem is that burdens are too high that must come down. There are four ways this can happen. People, business, and governments cut their spending. 2. They are reduced to repairs and restructuring. Where is the best? 2. They are reduced for repairs and structuring. Where is redistributed from the haves to the have-nots. And finally, 4. The central bank prints new money. These four ways have happened in everything leveraging in modern history. Usually spending is cut first. As we just saw, people, businesses, and one government tied their belts and cut their spending so that they can pay down their debt. It's often referred to as a salary, and borrowers stop taking on new debt and started paying down old debt. You might expect the debt burden to decrease, but the opposite happened because spending is cut, and one man's spending is another man's income. It causes incomes to fall. Therefore, faster than debt are repaid, and the debt burden actually gets worse. As we've seen, this current spending is deflationary and painful. Businesses are forced to cut costs, which means less job and higher unemployment. This leads to the next step. Debt must be reduced. Many borrowers find themselves unable to repay their loans, and a borrower's debt lenders said. When a borrower doesn't repay the bank, people get nervous that the bank won't to be able to repay them, so they resort to withdraw more from the bank. Banks are squeezed and people, business and banks are default on their debt. This is a economic contraction is a depression. A big part of the fourth depression is people discovering much of what they thought was their world is really there. Let's go back to the bar. When you put bottle of beer and put it on the barrel, you promise to repay the bartender. Your promises become the asset of the bartender. But if you break your promise, if you don't pay him back and just shower depend on your bartender, then the asset he has is really worth anything. And as this is basically dispute. Many lenders don't want their asset to disappear and agree to debt restructuring. Debt restructuring means lenders get paid back less, or get paid back over a longer time frame, or at a lower interest rate than was first agreed. Somehow a contract is broken in a way that reduces debt. Lenders who owe the latter have a little of something that owe nothing, even though debt disappears. The restructuring costs incomes and asset value to disappear faster, so that continue to contest to get worse. Like corresponding, the reduction is so painful and deflationary. All of this impact the central government because lower incomes and less employment means the government collects fixed pure taxes. At the same time, it needs to increase its spending because employment has lessened. Many of the employed have an inadequate saving and need financial support from the government. Additionally, governments create stimulus plans and increases their spending to make up for the decreases in the economy. Government's budget fixes exploiting the deleveraging because they spend more than they earn in taxes. This is what's happening when you hear about the deficits in the news. To fund their deficit, governments need to either raise taxes or borrow money. But incomes falling, and so money flowing. Who is the money going to come from? The rich. Since government and in the money since wealth is heavily contested in the hands of the small percentage of the poor, people of governments naturally raises taxes on the rich, which facilitate on the destruction of the rich in the economy. The rich. Since government needs more money and since the world is heavily connected, the rich. Since government needs more money and since the world is heavily concentrated in the hands of a small percentage of the people, governments naturally raise taxes on the wealthy, which facilitates a redistribution of wealth in the economy from the haves to the have-nots. But have-nots who were suffering began to resent the world haves. The world haves being squeezed by the weaker economy, falling asset prices and higher taxes began to resent the have-nots. If the depression continues, social disorder can break out. Not only the distinction rise within countries, they can rise between countries, especially the very incredible countries. This situation can lead to political changes that they sometimes be extreme. In 1930, they saw Hitler coming to power, war in Europe, and depression in the United States. The pressure to do something to end the depression increases. Remember, most of what people thought was money was actually credit. So when credit disappears, people don't have enough money. People are desperate for money, and remember who can print money? The central bank account, having already lowered its interest rates to nearly zero, is forced to print money. Unlike corresponding debt reduction and wealth redistribution, printing money and inflation are stimulus. Inevitably, but the central bank print new money out of thin air and use it to buy financial assets and government bonds. Corresponding debt reduction and wealth redistribution, printing money, inflationary and stimulus. Inevitably, and the central bank prints new money out of thin air and use it to buy financial assets and the government bonds. It happened in the United States during the Great Depression, and again in 2008 with the United States Central Bank. The Federal Reserve printed over $2 trillion. Other central banks around the world that they could print a lot of money too. By buying financial assets with this money, it helps drive up asset prices, which makes people more credit-worthy. However, this only helps those who want financial assets. You see, the central bank can print money, but it can only buy financial assets. The central government, on the other hand, can buy goods and services and put money in the hands of the people, but it can't print money. So in order to stimulate the economy, the two must cooperate. By buying government bonds, the central bank essentially lends money to the government, allowing it to run a deficit and increase spending on goods and services through its stimulus programs and employment benefit. This increases the people's income as well as the government's debt. However, it will lower the economy's total debt burden. This is a very risky time. Policymakers need to balance the four ways that their burdens come down. The deflationary wave needed to balance with the inflationary waves in order to maintain stability. A balance correctly, there can be a beautiful deleveraging. You see, deleveraging can be ugly or it can be beautiful. How can I deleveraging be beautiful? Even though Even though deliberating is a difficult situation, handling a difficult situation in the best possible way is beautiful, a lot more beautiful than the pure unbalanced exists at a deliberating pace. And a beautiful deliberating depth and impression for program. Success at the leveraging pace. In a beautiful leveraging depth, decline relative to income, real economic growth is positive, and inflation is the problem. It is achieved by having the right balance. The right balance requires certain mix of current spending, reducing debt, transferring wealth, and printing money so that economy and social stability can be maintained. People ask if printing money will realize inflation. It won't if it accepts falling credit. Remember that spending is what matters. $1 of spending paid over with money has the same effect on prices as dollars of spending paid for with credit. By printing money, the central bank can make up for the disappearance of credit with an increase in the amount of money. In order to turn things around, the central bank needs to not only farm up income growth, but get the rate of income grow higher than the rate of interest on the accumulated debt. So what do I mean by that? Basically, income needs to grow faster than debt grows. For example, let's assume that the country going to deleveraging as a debt to income ratio of 100%. That means that the amount of debt it has is the same as the amount of income that your country makes in year. Now thinking about the interest rate of the debt, let's say is 2%. If debt is growing at 2% because of the interest rate and income is only growing at around 0%, you will never reduce your debt further. But you need to bring in money to get the rate of income growth. How about the rate of interest? However, printing money could easily be a boost because it's so easy to do and people perfect it the alternatives. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to do and people are fulfilling it to alternatives. The key is printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to do and people in the alternatives. The key is to avoid printing too much money and crossing acceptably behind inflation the way Germany did during its deleveraging in the 1920s. If policymakers achieve the deleveraging, if policymakers achieve the right balance of deleveraging, it's just dramatic. Growth is slow, but the burdens go down. That's a beautiful deleveraging. When incomes begin to rise, borrowers begin to appear more creditworthy. And when borrowers appear more creditworthy, lenders begin to lend money again. The burdens finally begin to fail for able to borrow money. People can spend more. Eventually, the economy begins to grow again, and leading to the inflation follows of the long-term debt cycle. The deleveraging process can be horrible if handled badly. If handled well, it will eventually fix the problem. It takes roughly a decade or more for debt burdens to fail economic activity to get back to normal, hence the term lost decade. In closing, of course, economy is a little bit more complicated than this template suggests. However, weighing the short-term debt cycle on top of the long-term debt cycles and then laying both of them on top of the productivity growth run give us a both of them of the productivity growth line. Give us a reasonably good template for saying where we're now and where we're probably headed. So in summary, there are three rules of thumb that I'd like you to take away from this. First, don't have debt rise faster than income because your debt burdens will eventually crush you. Second, don't have income rise faster than productivity because you'll eventually become uncomfortable. And third, you do all that you can to raise your productivity because in the long run, that's what matters most. It's a simple advice for you and a simple advice policymaker. You might be surprised, but most people, including most policymakers, don't pay enough attention to this. This template has worked for me, and I hope it will work for you. Thank you.